ये एक मंजिल है तो रास्ते भी होंगे और एक मेंटर भी जो मुश्किलों को आसान बना दे। नतीजे संयोग नहीं होते, दूसरों से बेहतर स्कोर होते हैं। GS Score, an institute for civil services.
Good career is a process, and mentoring at GS Score is driven by primarily two objectives. One is empowerment and another is excellence. This is what we are known for.
कामयाबी की राह पर 1000 से भी ज्यादा निशान। GS Score।
Hello, I am Arya V M. I am 36th rank holder of Civil Service Exam 2022, and I could manage to score more than 400 in all my GS papers, like altogether in all my GS papers. And here I would like to say how I used my current affairs preparation and my prelims knowledge to my advantage so that I can score better in GS papers. So I'll first talk about the preparation part of it, and then I'll say how I used it. So with current affairs preparation, I mainly relied on newspaper. I read the Hindu as part of my prelims and mains preparation. So what I used to do first, I took the syllabus and I took previous year questions. There I got to identify certain important areas from which questions will be asked. But I must confess that first I used to consider each and everything to be very important. I used to make very bulk notes out of it. But in due course of time, I could make my notes very short. And so I took newspaper. I used to read it as any other aspirant would be reading it, giving importance to only a few areas. And whenever I could find something striking and whenever I could find some article to be important, I tried to note it down. And for the fact part of it, I used to note down only 1 or 2 points regarding the same. And when it comes to the analysis part of it, I used to go through the Hindu's editorial, and if I could find something to be excellent, I tried to note down 4 or 5 points out of it, and I think I used that further in my mains answers, and that made a difference. And I also relied on the monthly compilation of Vision IAS for my preparation. There what I did was, as part of my prelims preparation, I used to read Vision IAS, and at that point of time I also used to go through the analysis part of it. This going through the analysis part helped me to structure my mains answer in a better manner. And it's not just about structuring, but also to understand how I can turn even the obvious or mundane points into solid relevant points as part of an answer. And I used to highlight, while reading through the monthly magazine, I used to highlight the things that I thought important, and then during my revision I used to revise only those highlighted parts again and again. And for prelims, that helped me to solve my answers in a logical manner, and when it comes to mains, it helped me to integrate the prelims knowledge in my mains answers, and that I think would have added some value to my answers. And coming to the practical part of it, about how I went about using it. What I mainly used to do was, I tried to add some value to my introduction and conclusion. Like most of us know that, and we'll try to write an introduction and conclusion, but we'll mostly write it for the sake of it. But what I tried to do was, I tried to bring some current connect or some value addition to my introduction and conclusion that may fetch me 0.5 marks at least, and I think eventually that will make a difference. For instance, in paper 1, we had a question on the use of lion and bull figures, or how they were represented in Indian art and culture. So as a conclusion, I mentioned one quote by PM Modi ji, where he considered India's civil servants as the unseen fourth line, and using that quote, that instance, I try to show that these lion and bull figures are still holding importance in Indian scenario. And then there was a question on rubber. We know that was a very random question. We could write some facts about rubber. The best that we could do was to draw a world map and shade the major regions in which rubber was cultivated, and then again write about its basic. And again, as a conclusion, there I mentioned that in Assam the government is coming up with a GM rubber, so that we can manage the environmental aspects of it, but also cultivate it in other parts where even the weather is not very conducive. And again, as another instance, I will say that I used the issue of Ever Given, the ship that was being stuck at Straits and at the Suez Canal. So, there I used it as part of my conclusion on a question on Straits and Isthmus. So, there also what I think that it helped me to do was, one, of course, to add some value or to make my conclusions and introductions different and vibrant. And another thing, especially with this GS1 static portion, how it helped me was that it helped me to show that even the question may appear very static or very mundane, they were asked because they have some current relevance. Like for instance, the question on Straits and Isthmus, though it can appear to be a very basic geography question, there was one chalk point that was very much in news. It is not exactly a strait or isthmus, but it was a chalk point in news. So, I tried to show that this question was particularly asked because it was there in news or it is still relevant. Again, I followed somewhat similar strategy for GS2 paper also. There, not just for introduction and conclusion, I tried to use the current affairs part of it as part of my examples. For instance, there was a question on I2U2. For that, I used the example of a plant called Ecopia that I have come across as part of my GS studies, which was, if I am correct, it was financed by one country, technology was provided by Israel, and it was set up in UAE, if I am correct. So, I provided that as an excellent example of the technological and financial cooperation between all the countries of I2U2. So, this is how I managed to tweak my answers or tweak the knowledge that I had as part of my current affairs preparation when it comes to GS papers. And something else that I used to do was, I used to write generic points, but I used to give specific examples so that I can fetch more marks. For instance, all of us would have expected a question on civil society or self-help groups. So, I used to write generic points. It led to social capital formation. Then I used to give example of a civil society that helped many people during COVID. So, that made, I think that made my points solid and more attractive. And again, for introduction, I not just used current affairs, but a little bit part of history. For instance, we know we will study the history of relations between countries in international relations. We will not delve very deep into it, but there was a question on India's relations with Sri Lanka. So, I started with the relation of India and Sri Lanka, went back to the age of Rama, Buddha, and also even during the age of Cholas, and then I went into my answer. So, linking the history part of it or linking it with current affairs or providing current affairs topics as examples, I think it helped me to make my answers a little bit different and distinct. And when it comes to paper 3, we know data is very important for paper 3, especially the economy part of it. But rather than that, I used the government schemes and measures that I learned as part of my prelims, as part of the way forward suggestions and some measures to tackle the issues when it comes to GS3. And I think bringing in more government initiatives will not just help us to add value or come up with more points, but it will also show that we are somebody who is aware of government schemes, and we also have the ability to link whatever we read or whatever schemes that we know about to the advantage of people. For instance, in CSE 2022, there was a question on PDS. I have read about the Tamil Nadu model of PDS system and also the biometric authentication that is followed in some states, if I am remembering correctly, in states like Gujarat. So, I used to mention that as examples. In way forward, I used to say technology integration, and I give example Gujarat model of biometric authentication, like that. And again, in another paper, that is the most crucial paper that for many people would be GS4. There mostly you will take examples for each and every value from newspapers, and we will also rely on sites like Better India and all for taking examples. And I also used to collect examples from my newspaper reading for GS4 paper. And I tried to include the current affairs examples that I took. For instance, for a value like compassion, I have taken the story of Subaida, a lady from Kerala who had sold her goats so that she can donate some amount to the relief fund. And again, we had a question on the role of teacher, which is based on a quote by Gandhiji. So, regarding the role of teacher, I mentioned the example of a teacher who used to travel and cycle for kilometers during COVID times to go and teach his children. So, I used these instances that I picked up from newspapers so that I can add some current connect to even to the mundane answers that I am writing. And something else that I tried to do was to include maps in my answers whenever possible. You will usually add maps or geography and ecology papers and sometimes international relations paper also, but I try to do that even for history paper. For instance, if there is a question asked on women freedom fighters, I simply used to draw a map and mention 2 or 3 places from which women freedom fighters hailed from. And I had a question on Indian home rule movement during one of my mocks. There what I used to do was, I again drew a map of India and I shaded those areas that's led by Tilak, and I again shaded in a different manner those areas that's led by Annie Besant. So, I think this is purely based on my prelims factual knowledge. I just creatively turned it into a map and that might have fetched me 0.5 marks. And I think this kind of integrated preparation, that is using our prelims knowledge in our mains, will help us to make our mains answers more attractive and more vibrant. And I think this will also enrich our prelims preparation also, because we had this so many women freedom fighters, the news about them coming up during my preparation time. So, I used to mark them in a map so that I can remember them better. So, I use this map making and mind maps technique that I used for my mains to study prelims topics very effectively also. And talking about current affairs preparation, there is something extra that I would like to speak about, that we will mostly rely on newspaper and the compilations of newspaper or newspaper analysis that's available over internet. And I also used to watch some shorts by even the Hindu. There was a short by Hindu that talked about cloudburst. It was during an incident of cloudburst that happened in some northern state of India, and they had a very detailed shot on that, and I just remember seeing that shots, and that helped me to entirely answer a 10 marker in my real mains. So, I think even YouTube videos and the analysis part of it, I used to listen to the print, some videos of the print. I think that in due course of time these cumulative knowledge helped me not just to be a knowledgeable or enriched person, but also I tried to integrate them in my answers in such a way that it can help me to have some relative advantage when compared to other people or other papers. So, this is the basic idea of it. I think we should not see prelims and mains in silos. We can use prelims knowledge in mains, and we can use the mind maps or the analysis techniques that we use in mains to remember things in prelims or even solve the questions logically in prelims. And again, I think it is also important to see GS 1, 2, 3, 4, all these papers as a wholesome package rather than seeing them as different branches, because we can use something that we learned as part of GS 1 in GS 4 also. For instance, if we are taking the story of Kanaklata Barwa, who fought very valiantly against the Britishers, we can take her as an example of courage in GS 4. And we can also take the example of a teacher that I mentioned, who travelled a lot in order to teach his children, as an example of some bright spot when it comes to the issues that's faced by people during COVID and how people managed to overcome it. So, I think we should not see them as silos. We can feel free to use whatever examples that we study as part of one paper in another. And one extra thing about managing the whole content part of it. we may find it very difficult to develop content or the data part or the fact part for each and every topic that's there in syllabus. So I followed a theme based approach where I took some major themes that could be traced in all the 4 papers. For instance, if we take the issue of women, the empowerment of women, safety of women, I think these like different angles of it will be asked in different papers. In society we will see one aspect of it, in GS4 we will see that case study will be there about the problems faced by women. In GS2 also we will see the questions on health, education of women being disrupted and all. So I took the topic or the theme of women and I took one sub theme, that is the safety of women. I took I noted down 2 to 3 data on that to show the intensity of it, and I also noted down some best practices and some government initiatives for that. Again I took the theme of tribals for that matter, and we know that I took 1 or 2 data to show the issues or the condition of tribals in India, and also I took some best practices and some initiatives taken by different people in order to better their conditions also. So in this way I zeroed in on a few themes that could be used across all the papers, and then I try to develop data and best practices for each and every one of them. So that this helped me to not just use minimum content in a maximum possible manner, but also to create a mutual connect between all the 4 papers. So this is the this is the crux of what I would like to say, and I think mains answer writing is something that you can do very comfortably if you try to appreciate the question better and think why that question could have been asked at that particular time, and I think that will help us to include current affairs in our answers also. So that's pretty much about what I would like to say, and I have started a Telegram channel to help the aspirants with answers, and also I have uploaded some of my answers and some of the materials that I followed and some of the notes that I developed as part of my preparation. You can find its link in the description below this video. So please subscribe and see whether it's useful to you. Also, for those who are preparing for mains this time, I think you can comfortably understand the major themes that's asked by UPSC and prepare along that lines. And for the people who will be preparing for the next mains or the upcoming mains, I think it's always important to score well for mains to figure in the list and to get very good rank. So try to utilize the time that you have and try to develop the basic decent content for mains, a basic framework of it, so that you can use that further. And I think this is once you figure it out, this is like almost like a game or a mathematical problem to be solved. So I hope you will get the thrill and trick of it. All the best. Thank you.